Tako, ura je čas. Lepo pozdravljeni in dobrodošli.
Hello, and welcome to our online event, which we have called Greener and Healthier Food. How do we recognize it? Today's event is organized by Umanotera in cooperation with the Slovenian Consumers Association as part of the Climate Action to the Table project, which is part of the European Climate Initiative, a project funding instrument of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. My name is Gautier. I work at Umanotera and will be moderating today's event. I'm delighted to welcome our speakers today who come from the Consumers Association of Slovenia, the European Consumers Organization, BEUC, and Umanotera. What is the purpose of today's event? We have designed it with the understanding that consumers can make an important contribution to tackling the climate crisis by making sustainable purchasing decisions while also taking care of their health. Environmental and organic labels and certifications can help us do this, but because there are so many of them, it can be difficult to identify the ones that are trustworthy and that assure us that the products we buy are truly eco-friendly and healthy. How to navigate this labyrinth of labels, how to avoid being deceived by greenwashing, and what does green and healthy food look like? This will be some of the questions raised at today's event. I'm sure that today we will hear many answers to the questions we often find ourselves in front of as consumers. After the 4 presentations, there will be some time for your questions and for a short discussion. So if you have any questions, you can also write them in a chat box as we go. Let me also tell you that the event is being recorded and live streamed on the Umanotera's Facebook page. You are welcome to watch the event on Facebook as well, but I must point out that we will only be taking questions that we get via Zoom. So if you have any, please join us via Zoom. If anyone needs interpretation from Slovenian into English or vice versa, please click on the interpretation translation icon below and select the language you wish to listen to. If you have any technical issues during the event, please feel free to contact my colleague Hanna Turšić, who is in charge of the technical part. Now, let's start with the program. First, I'd like to invite to the floor Ms. Nika Tavčar, a project manager at Umanotera, who's been working on the topic of food in times of climate change for several years now. She'll give you an overview of the key principles of a more climate-friendly diet. So, Nika, what is a greener and healthier food? Thank you. Let me just go on. Let me just start with the European State of the Climate report. This report showed that methane has been at a record high. We've also faced global warming, which means that extreme weather events are occurring. In Europe, we've witnessed some extreme events such as fires, floods, and so on. Sea levels have been rising. And how is this all related to food? It is very hard to measure greenhouse gas emissions from food. But there has been a study made. It was made last year, and it showed that food supply was the source of 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. Most of these emissions, 2/3, come from agriculture and land use, as well as land use change. The latter is mainly due to the clearing of vast areas of tropical forests to make land for grazing and agricultural production, often for animal feed, which is then imported to Europe. Current food production practices are leading to an accelerated loss of biodiversity, but biodiversity is essential for our survival, as well as to a decline in drinking water quality and soil fertility. scientists agreed that food supply will be a key factor in preserving biodiversity and the quality of drinking water and fertile soils. We need to reduce the consumption of primary resources. We also need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. When we talk about food and climate change, we need to remember something else. The relationship between the food supply chain and climate is not a one-way street. The food supply system drives climate change, but at the same time, climate change is changing the conditions for agriculture everywhere on Earth and threatening our food security. We are facing a major challenge to reduce emissions, but on the other hand, we need to adapt to climate change that we are not able to prevent. So the food supply chain is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions and a consumer of natural resources. It can only be brought into a more sustainable framework through changes in both the production and consumption end of the food chain. Of course, changing eating habits alone will not solve the climate crisis, but at the same time, the climate crisis cannot be addressed adequately without changing eating habits. How do we do this, and what even is more climate friendly and healthy food? So let us review greenhouse gas emissions in the entire food supply chain. Looking at this, we find 7 guiding principles for a more climate-friendly diet. This food that is eco-friendly is mostly plant-based. It is produced organically or biodynamically. It is not wasted. It is as local as possible. It is seasonal, minimally processed, and minimally packaged. Why is it better to choose mainly plant-based foods? The reason is that animal food, especially meat and dairy, have a much higher carbon footprint than plant-based foods. In addition, livestock production is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. In addition, a large part of livestock feed comes from countries where there is deforestation of tropical forests, and which are the most important carbon sink. Industrial livestock farming is also responsible for the degradation of water and soil quality and is a key contributor to biodiversity loss. Choosing a predominantly plant-based diet is one of the most effective carbon footprint reduction measures that can be taken at an individual level. This is how you can reduce your own carbon footprint. Health is an important aspect here as well. The Slovenian Institute of Public Health has issued recommendations against eating more than 0.3 kilos of red meat or meat products per week. Another important topic is that the food we eat should be organic. I will not go into this in a lot of detail because we will hear a lot about this later. So this second principle will be the focus of today's conference. So let me go on to the next principle, that is reducing food waste. We want to avoid decomposing food, because when food decomposes, it releases methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. Throwing away edible food also wastes the resources that were used to produce it. Another important principle is food that is seasonal and local. This means that this food hasn't been treated with products that prevent it from going bad and isn't part of lengthy distribution and transport processes. Last but not least, we advise, so we advocate food that is minimally processed and minimally packaged. As you know, plastic that is incinerated produces greenhouse gases as well. So this was a short overview of the main principles. They are not complex, and any one of us could implement at least some of them into our everyday actions when it comes to food. Today, we will focus on recognizing products that are green and healthy. We cannot do everything on our own, so it's also important to have support on a systemic level, on the state level. And this would be all on my end. Thank you. Thank you, Nika. Now I'd like to give the floor to Boštjan Okorn, who has worked at the Slovenian Consumers Association for over 15 years. He's been focusing on embedding sustainability practices in the user experience. He will present the results of an international survey analyzing consumers' perceptions of sustainability in food, and in part 2, introduce us to the world of sustainability labels with a social perspective.
Primerjalno testiranje potrošniških organizacij je ena od stvari.
Thank you very much, and good morning from my behalf too. Yes, comparative studies are very important to us. Our results are, have no other purpose than getting information for the industry, for the media. We are looking at the useful aspects of usefulness of the product, but also sustainability, and we have improved this aspect in the last years, and we are trying to focus more on those points that are important for the consumer. We have to find a compromise between all the aspects of the products. We've conducted this survey together with 14 other countries. Participants were between 18 and 64 years old, and we wanted to understand how consumers perceive sustainability, how they are trying to behave in a sustainable way. It was not so much about what do they buy, but how do they perceive sustainability. We've established Sustainable Consumer Behavior Index, and we included mobility in it, transport, so also purchase of all products, not just food, then the energy aspect, and also waste management. So this survey does not necessarily indicate that people live in the way they are describing, but how they perceive sustainability and their activities. We had more than 40 experts involved from the whole Europe who established criteria for the index. Within these criteria, we also established pondering, which criteria is more important because we wanted the index reflect the actual situation as far as possible. And we were also considering which aspect of human activity actually contributes most to the global warming. These are two indices. The first one is general. It incorporates all the previously mentioned parameters and criteria from food, mobility, shopping, energy, and waste. 57 here does not mean a lot or a little. These countries that are purple, in those countries, the perception of sustainability was above average, and the orange ones were those where it was below average. And we can see that Slovenia is quite high, which means that the perception of sustainability in Slovenia is above average. The same goes for Spain. Why am I mentioning Spain? Because they were part of this project and they participated in the research. That's why I'm going to mention them. We can see that in the Czech Republic, for example, or Denmark, the perception of sustainability is lower, and that the overall index reflects this. Also, when it comes to food, I have to mention that Slovenia, for example, did worse in transport, for example, but overall we are above average. For experts, food is the most important when it comes to sustainability. It has the largest share. Above a quarter of the index is represented by nutrition. Within this index, experts included reduction of consumption of meat and other animal foods, then reducing food waste, consuming seasonal food, local if possible, then buying products with sustainability labels. And here we have come to the consumer, who is often confused in the supermarket. And then last but not least, preventing and reducing packaging. Food should be as fresh as possible, and the amount of packaging should be as little as possible. Here you will always see Slovenia, Spain, and then the best and the worst country when I will comment these parameters. Proportion of vegans is quite low in all countries. Slovenia and Spain are a little bit above average. Canada is the best. Since Canada is not in the EU, I'm mentioning Austria and the Netherlands here, who are the best within the EU. Italy is the worst. The proportion of vegetarians is a bit higher, but still low, less than 3%. Slovenia is at about the average. Austria is the highest ranking here, and Spain the lowest. Spain is quite low. Then flexitarians is another group which shows that the society is ready to shift from meat-based to a more plant-based food. We can see here that in the Netherlands, for example, a fifth of the population already prioritizes plant-based food. In Slovenia, we are very high when it comes to consumers who do eat meat and meat products and are not willing to give them up. We are above the average, as you can see here. While, for example, in Italy, people are considering giving more space to non-meat products. As regards prevention of food waste, you can see that differences among countries here are quite considerable. Carefree food handling means that they're not considering how much they will actually use. They buy as much as they want, regardless of their actual consumption. Here we can see that Slovenia and Spain are both below average. Italy is doing quite well, but overall we can say that in general consumers do consider what to buy and how much in order to avoid waste. Then, as far as seasonal food is concerned, people who do not think about seasonal food at all, their proportion is quite low, just about 5% on average. In Slovenia, a little bit less than 4%. And Italy was the best in this respect here. Slovenia is a little bit below average when it comes to buying local food. Denmark was the worst and Italy was the best here. And now we've come to the ecological sustainability labels. Here we did not distinguish between those labels that are more reliable and less reliable, but all the labels together. About a fifth of consumers do not look for sustainability levels. For example, in Slovenia, we're a little bit below average, and you can see that Austrians in Austria, only 8.4% consumers consider the labels. About 10% of Austrians buy more than 60% of goods in this way, so not considering. And then preventing and reducing packaging waste. Here, Slovenia is doing well. There are not many people who are not interested at all in the packaging. The majority of people is trying to avoid packaging as much as possible. Denmark did the worst here. So they're not very sustainable when it comes to packaging. The most important part of sustainability for experts is nutrition, while for the consumers it is the third one. According to consumers, waste was ranked first and energy the second. This is not surprising because we've been told since the primary school that we have to pay attention to our waste management. Also, we are very mindful of energy. However, experts found out based on studies that food is much more important than those two categories. As regards nutrition, only a very small portion of people believed that food is not significant, and food is very important for almost half consumers in Slovenia, which is quite high. In Spain, about 33%, and in Netherlands, for example, only 13%. And the last question, do you behave in a sustainable way when it comes to nutrition? Those who answered not at all were very few. In Slovenia, a quarter of people believe they behave in a sustainable way, so this is not necessarily the actual situation, but people perceived them as sustainable. A quarter of them in Slovenia, in Spain 50%, and in Netherlands only about 6%. So this is the perception. Whether we actually behave this way is another question. But anyway, we believe that people were sincere enough when answering these questions, so that we can say that we do want to behave in a sustainable way only when it comes to nutrition. The question is, of course, to what extent we can put this into practice. So the question is, when we pose the question, why do we not behave sustainably? The most frequent question was, because it's too expensive. If we compare sustainably produced food versus non-sustainable, we can see a big difference in the prices very often. That's why people do not decide to buy sustainably produced food. Also, there is a lack of sustainable choice and lack of information. People are not sure if a certain product is really sustainable or not. Lack of time did not receive such a high share. Perhaps in Slovenia, this percentage was a bit higher because people perceive that sustainably produced food can only be found in the market, and then that they can go there on Saturdays, for example, to purchase it. So from these answers, we can also understand that people are do not believe entirely the labels, that they sometimes choose the easier way out when it comes to food, and that the people do not understand the plenitude of signs and labels on the food. Also, a lot of food is packed, and it is impossible to purchase it without packaging. And now we've come to sustainability labels. There are lots of them, and in the following minutes, we are going to look at what we have found out based on our survey of the market of chocolate and products with palm oil. We wanted to see if we can trust the labels on those products. We have found out that there is a lot of green labels, more than 450 different ones, that we do not know who is behind them, who checks them, that point out certain characteristics that are impossible in reality. And lately also we have found out that companies are buying indulgences with these labels. They do not actually reduce their carbon print. They just acquire one such label to make them look better. Anyway, companies do want to show with these labels that their products are better than their competitions, even though it may not be so. We have assessed whether labels were transparent, if there are well-defined rules behind them and monitoring of compliance with these rules. So there must be reliable institutions behind that labels, and also the range covered by the label. Is this the social aspect of production or ecological aspect of production, or all together? Very few labels cover the entire production chain, which would be desirable. We all know fair trade. This is the World Fair Trade Organization label. You will not find it on many products, because only those products where the principles of fair trade are respected throughout the production chain, only those products can bear this label. So it covers sociological aspects, good working conditions, absence of child labor, and so on, and also the price. It ensures fair payment for producers. However, it's not necessary for the products to be produced organically, even though this is a trustworthy organization, so the level of trustworthy was high. The second label, also connected to fair trade, is seen more often. This is Fair Trade International. It is easier to get it because it is connected to specific product. If we have simple products such as bananas or coffees, it shows that they have been produced according to fair trade standards. If we have several ingredients in a product, then it's marked clearly which of those is produced fairly. All the ingredients for which fair trade standards are available must also meet these standards. In case of chocolate, for example, cocoa, sugar, and vanilla, and at least 20% of these ingredients must be present in the product. The next one is fair trade tag, which only shows that one particular ingredient, cocoa in our case, complies with the fair trade rules, and others do not, probably. If we want to buy sustainable, the trust here is lower than in the previous cases. This label is a step towards greater sustainability, but it is not as strong as the previous one, which shows that a lot of ingredients come from fair trade. The next one is German label. Here, of course, those labels that can be met in Slovenia are included. And since we have a lot of German projects, we can see this label as well, GEPA, fair. Again, it is connected with fair trade. It has additional criteria that want to additionally support the community of producers, also schooling of children. And the criteria for this label are more demanding than the basic requirement for fair trade of the organization WTFO, of which GEPA is also a member. So the level of trust is high. This label combines what we would like to see on as many products as possible. So certified organic production, green leaf EU that we're going to see later on, and at the same time additional criteria connected to social rights, so respect for workers' rights, absence of nanomaterials to prevent dangerous materials, and there are also stricter criteria for water management, fertilization, animal care, and so on. And we attributed the label of sustainability very high. Other labels, Rainforest Alliance is also very frequent in Slovenia. It's quite trustworthy, however, less than previous labels. The product that bears it must contain at least 30% of certified cocoa, but at the same time, those who receive the license must commit to increase this level to 90% within the next 5 years. However, there is no much control over these commitments. That's why the level of trustworthy is low. The next one is UTZ, which was very popular for a while in Slovenia. However, now the trust has decreased because there is no control, and we've learned that companies who did not comply did not actually improve their compliance because there is no control. This is a label regarding palm oil. It's good that there is a label also regarding palm oil, sustainable palm oil production. However, this mark does not prevent deforestation, does not take into account greenhouse gas emissions, reacts very slowly to complaints, and they also struggle to comply with their own standard. That's why it's not trustworthy. The trust is very low, and we wish that as regards palm oil, we would have a more trustworthy label. There are many more labels on chocolates. What is good is that many of them do include social aspects as well. However, there should always be external institutions in charge of monitoring, and the most important condition of trust is also missing on some of them, and that is that certification should be carried out by independent bodies. Thank you for your attention. So these were two surveys that showed what consumers understand under the term sustainability on one hand, and on the other hand, what is actually there in shops. And now I will give the floor to our Nika.
Thank you for giving me the stage. There was a question whether there is an English version of the study available. Yes, there is, and we will make it available to you. And now I'd like to give the floor to Nika Kremić, who's been in charge of food at the Slovene Consumers Association. She has been working on independent tests comparing food products in Slovenia. She will tell us which eco-labels can be found on products in Slovenia and what the situation is like in Slovenia. The floor is yours. Thank you. In addition to sustainability labels, I'd like to focus in particularly on eco-labels today. So how do you recognize eco-labels on products? Well, an eco-label such as EU organic logo, this is the label that is mandatory on all organic food. This means that such a product is certified. Below the logo with the white leaf on the green background, there is a special number, a special code that shows how this product is being controlled and monitored. There's also the designation of origin of the food from organic farming. So, what does this food guarantee for the consumer? It guarantees that food has been produced organically, that is certified and subject to regular monitoring. This monitoring is being made on a regular basis, and it complies with laws and regulations in this field, and it means that the entire supply chain is in line with the European law, including production, processing, packaging, storage, and transport. When talking about organic products with organic labels, it is important to focus on Slovenian products when you are in Slovenia. This is because transport routes are shorter, and with buying such products, we are supporting local farmers. How can you check the origin of an organic product? Well, the origin may be indicated on the packaging, as I already said, below the green organic label, there is the unique code of the institution that controls the product, and below there is the designation of origin. Sometimes ingredients in certain products come from various countries, and in this case you can see the designation saying EU agriculture or non-EU agriculture. All organic food within the EU agriculture is subject to the same standards regardless of the country of production or processing. When it comes to imported organic food, it's required to be produced under the same conditions as those laid down in the European rules. Apart from the EU organic logo, there are many other labels. Some of them are national, and they don't guarantee any other stricter standards, but they're still used because they've been around before the European organic logo. In certain countries, these labels are very well recognized among consumers. Slovenia knows the first ekološki logo that you see on the left. Then there's the German bio label, and on the right there's a French eco label used since 1985. Apart from those, you can also find on food products various labels by international organizations. These are independent accredited certification organizations that issue certificates. There are two examples that you can see on the slide. Both are Slovenian. The first one is Koncert, and the IKC. There are additional voluntary markings. Those go beyond what the EU organic label requires. An example of this is Demeter. It can be stricter than the EU organic logo, or it can include other aspects, so additional aspects. These labels are usually awarded by various organic farmer communities and so on. So Demeter, our example, is based in Germany, and it requires all products to be produced according to the biodynamic method. The standards of product purity are very strict. It also governs the use of fertilizers very strictly. It provides that all animal feed must be produced organically as well, and so on. Well, moving on, Biodar. This is a Slovenian voluntary marking. It is awarded by the Federation of Organic Farmers Associations of Slovenia, and they are stricter than the rules for strictly organic farming. The food must come from a farm that is fully committed to organic production. The next example, the bio label, is awarded by the Agrarmarkt Austria. It's also quite strict. Some criteria are stricter than the organic legislation. There's a mandatory indication of origin for all ingredients and all products. A quarter less additives are allowed compared to organic legislation. All agricultural raw materials must come from Austria if they are available, and the use of palm oil is prohibited. On this slide, there is another Austrian label. You can find this label on certain products in Slovenian shops as well. This one is awarded by the Austrian Organic Farmers Association called Bio Austria. This label prohibits the rearing of high-yielding dairy cows. It limits the number of laying hens in a barn. Feed imports are subject to extremely strict rules, and the whole farm must be organic. From the environmental point of view, it is important to choose products that come from organic farming. Why? Organic products have a positive impact on biodiversity. It also improves animal welfare. It also improves soil fertility because exclusively organic humus is produced. There is crop rotation and fertilizers from stables of organically reared animals. There are less greenhouse gas emissions compared to conventional farming, and the distribution routes are shorter. But not only the environment is important, it's also about our health. Organic food is less contaminated with pesticides, and some studies show advantages in the nutritional values of certain organic foods compared to conventional foods. For example, fruits and vegetables that are grown organically include more polyphenols, and less cadmium. However, there are some challenges that need to be addressed. Eco-labels often or usually don't include the social aspects, such as working conditions and fair pay for workers. It also doesn't guarantee that the product is healthy. Products with eco-labels can still be high in sugar, fat, and salt. So this is something that must be taken into account, and in this respect, organic and conventional products can be unhealthy in the same way. So here is potato chips as an example, sweets and chocolate cookies that are all organic, but doesn't mean they are healthy. At the beginning of this year, we had a look at the offer of products bearing the EU organic logo. We visited 7 various store chains and 13 various shops. We had a look at the range of organic flour, milk, eggs, yogurt, and extra virgin olive oil. We visited different sized stores in Ljubljana and compared the products with the range of conventional food products of the same type. We looked at almost 500 various products of different brands. We found that the organic offer is rather limited, representing on average only 15% of the total offer. In the past, you could only find organic products on farmers' markets. Meanwhile, they are available in most larger stores, but the share is still rather limited and also varies considerably between various store chains. Certain store chains such as Tuš and Eurospin have a lot of room for improvement. We also looked at the origin of organic food. Unfortunately, only a third of all organic food products inspected have the Agriculture of Slovenia label. We found more of those in larger chains such as Spar or Mercator. There were no products bearing the Agriculture of Slovenia label in Eurospin, but most of the products were from the EU. Only 10% or so are labeled EU agriculture in Spar and Leclerc. Price is an important aspect when it comes to deciding what to buy, especially when talking about consumers that are not aware of the importance of organic farming. And this is why we also decided to compare prices of individual organic and conventional products. Looking at the bigger picture, you could say that at a first glance, organic products are more expensive than the conventional ones. This is to be expected. You were already able to hear that organic products are subject to regular inspection. They are more expensive to produce because they are produced organically. The yield can be smaller, and this all affects the price. The largest price difference was in eggs. The cheapest organic egg cost more than twice as much as a conventional egg. But when it comes to other products, prices can be quite similar. For example, yogurt. The cheapest organic yogurt had almost the same price per liter than a conventional one. Another question or another aspect is, where are organic products found? So there are two ways to address this. Either there can be a special department or an aisle devoted to organic products, or they can be placed among conventional products. There are advantages and disadvantages for both ways. So a plus of having an aisle devoted to organic products would be that it's easier to find, so it's easier for buyers, for consumers buying organically to find such products. But if organic products are placed among other ones, so if they can be found on conventional aisles and shelves, they can be bought by other consumers more easily, because every other consumer can be convinced to buy an organic product, not only those who decide so in advance. But there is a drawback in this as well, because the price barrier or the price difference can be more visible and more pronounced. Well, thank you. Now I'd like to give the stage to Camille and Patrycja. Camille works BEUC as an official responsible for food policies. She's been working on food policy for a while, and she also works on European legislation. Patrycja Gautier works at BEUC as well as a senior legal assistant. She's the head of the consumer rights team, where she's responsible for the entire consumer protection acquis, including current and forthcoming legislative documents on consumer law in the green transition. Camille and Patrycja, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I hope you can hear me well. Maybe first, 2 words for those of you who don't know BEUC. BEUC is an umbrella organization that represents national consumer organizations in Brussels towards the EU institutions. We have currently 46 members from 32 countries, and ZPS is one of our members, of course. So I'm very happy to attend this event. Thank you very much for the invitation. In the first part of the presentation, we wanted to first speak about greenwashing as a phenomenon in general. We've been talking a lot about food today, but greenwashing, of course, is a much wider problem. If we can move to the next slide, you will see just a couple of examples. And of course, I think maybe there is some, it needs a bit of time to switch the slides, but I will continue nevertheless. So the greenwashing is definitely a big problem now. Misleading claims are more and more present on the market among different types of products, not only food, as I said. It's often the highly polluting products, like the ones that are based on fossil fuels, for example. And this is really a pity, because the potential that we have now, with consumers being more and more concerned about the environment and the threat of the climate crisis, and making the efforts to lead a more environmentally friendly lifestyle and to choose more environmentally friendly products, those efforts are a bit in vain, because it's really difficult for them now to identify which products are the ones which are generally environmentally friendly. And so, yeah, if we move to the next slide. And why we need now an urgent change in the rules that tackle this problem. Well, as I mentioned, consumers are now concerned and really want to choose greener products, but this is being made difficult for them. It's like 61%, according to EU studies, do not understand which products are truly environmentally friendly, and as high as 45%. Consumers admit that they don't trust environmental claims. And to be honest, from our experience, they're right. There has been recently, in November in 2020, a CPC sweep. CPC is a network of consumer protection authorities across the EU, and they conduct some systematic checks. And in 2020, they chose environmental claims as a topic of their sweep and the checks. And the result was that they have stated that in around 42% of cases, the authorities had reasons to believe that the claims used by the traders were misleading. And that's a huge percentage. That's almost half of the claims that are being used on the market. But that is just another proof that this is a real problem. And that we cannot afford to wait any longer to tackle it in an effective way. If we move to the next slide, you will see that the EU institutions have also recognized that this is an issue and announced that there will be some initiatives that are supposed to remedy this problem. The first announcement was in December 2019, when the Green Deal communication was published, which of course listed a lot of different initiatives also from other fields, but including also specific ideas on how to tackle greenwashing. That was then later confirmed also with other two documents of strategic importance, the Circular Economy Action Plan and the New Consumer Agenda. In those documents, it was confirmed that the issue of green claims will be tackled on the EU level by two legislative proposals. So one of them is the proposal on empowering consumers in the green transition, which has already been published in March this year. And the second one, we're still expecting in the second half of the year, and that will be a proposal for a regulation on substantiating green claims with the product environmental footprint method. If we move to the next slide. Here I wanted to tell you a bit about the proposal that is already on the table, so the one on empowering consumers in the green transition. Greenwashing is just one part of this proposal. The proposal introduces targeted amendments to two horizontal consumer directives, to the directive on unfair commercial practices and the one on consumer rights. It's only the unfair commercial practices directive that is relevant here in the context of the greenwashing practices. And what was actually included in the proposal, where first of all, the proposal wants to introduce a ban on a case-by-case basis of two different practices. So first, it would not be allowed to make an environmental claim related to future environmental performance. So stating, for example, we will be carbon neutral in 2050. without clear, objective, and verifiable commitments and targets, and without an independent monitoring system. The second practice that will be also banned on a case-by-case basis would be advertising benefits for consumers that are considered as a common practice in the relevant market. On the next slide, you will see that apart from those two practices, there will be also another 4 practices that are now being proposed to be banned, but in this case, in all circumstances. So those practices will be added to the so-called blacklist of unfair practices, which are included into the annex of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And those 4 practices are displaying a sustainability label, which is not based on a certification scheme or not established by public authorities. That would be the first one, which would not be allowed anymore. And then making a generic environmental claim without being able to prove the excellent environmental performance. A generic environmental claim, in other words, a vague claim without specifying what the claim is really referring to. And then the 2 other practices would be to make an environmental claim about the entire product when actually it concerns only a certain aspect of that product, and presenting requirements imposed by law as a distinctive feature of the offer. If we move to the next slide, I wanted to talk to you a bit about BEUC's recommendations that we have developed ahead of those 2 proposals that have been announced. The proposal that we already have on the table, as I mentioned, it introduced targeted amendments to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. However, there are some important flaws of this approach, because this directive can only provide for an ex post control of claims, meaning that when the claims are already introduced on the market, they are there for a while, and then somebody comes forward and challenges the claim. Then the public authority or the court can take that on, can analyze that claim, check the evidence, and possibly ask to have that claim withdrawn from the market. So only an ex post control is possible. There are no rules on any systematic checks of the green claims that are being used on the market, and it often takes a very long time before the claim is actually removed from use, because as you know, the court proceedings, they can take years. So that is of course an issue, and it impacts our situation. Another problem is also a diverging interpretation on different provisions of the directive, and a different level of enforcement, which is dependent also a lot on the resources and the priorities of the national authorities, for instance. And since we see that really the urgency of the climate crisis is calling for much more ambitious measures that would effectively clean up the market and would not allow any misleading claims in the first place, we have developed a new set of recommendations, and we've been calling for a pre-approval procedure for all green claims and labels, which is inspired by a scheme that is already in place for health and nutrition claims in food. So if you work on food, you might know already this system. We have asked as well, like in the health and nutrition claims, for an EU level assessment of claims, and then for creating a public registry where the decisions about the pre-approval would be published and would have an erga-omnes effect, meaning that new traders that would like to use a similar claim would just need to check first whether it has been pre-approved before or not, and what were the conditions that need to be fulfilled so that the claim can be used. We have also asked to ban certain claims that are impossible to substantiate from the scientific point of view. One of the examples is the claim that is now very widely used, which is carbon neutral or CO2 neutral, climate neutral, or its equivalents, which we think cannot be achieved in reality, because the product can never be actually neutral to the climate. Other elements of our recommendations was to ask the traders to submit the evidence before the claim is used, and not only when the claim is challenged at some point by the authority or by the court. We have asked for a more effective market surveillance, which is also key, to remedy the situation, and for introducing a centralized accreditation scheme for green claims and labels. If we move to the next slide, you will see a little picture. But just to say that the goal of our recommendations is basically to make sure that no misleading claims enter the market in the first place, and to make sure that the green choice becomes an easy choice for consumers, so that they know which products to buy and they can trust the claims that are being used. And now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Camille for the rest of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrycja. Good morning to everyone, and apologies for the hiccup with the presentation at the start. I will now zoom in on a specific type of claim, and I have again the same problem that it's frozen. I cannot move the slide anymore. Yeah, so I will share my screen again. Sorry for that. So I will zoom in on a specific type of green claims, and that is environmental label or scoring system for food. And perhaps you have already come across some of these labels in supermarkets. With consumers increasingly concerned about the sustainability of their food choices, a range of actors, including retailers or food companies, have started to develop their own sustainability or environmental labels for food. The one that you see here on the slide are just some examples. There are many more, in fact. And some of these labels provide a single score that is meant to represent the overall green performance of the product. Other labels break it down into several components that each represent a certain specific impact, whether biodiversity or climate, etc. But the problem is that this proliferation of labels risks creating a lot of confusion for consumers, especially when it's not always clear to them what this label cover and mean exactly. So we in fact welcome the fact that the EU will try and put a bit of order in the way these companies and retailers communicate on the environmental impact of the products. So concretely, what is in the EU policy pipeline when it comes to this type of label? So as part of the Farm to Fork strategy, which is the EU blueprint for sustainable food and farming, the European Commission has announced that it will develop a new sustainable food labeling framework. And this framework will be part of a broader initiative on sustainable food system that we expect by the end of 2023. And the Commission has said that this framework will cover the nutritional, climate, environmental, and social aspects of food products. So it's quite broad. It's not clear whether it would be a single logo, but it's rather expected that it would be different elements, each covering a certain dimension of sustainability. And the Commission has also said that this framework should be consistent with relevant EU policy initiatives. And when it comes to the climate and environmental component, this would mean the Green Claims Initiative that Patrycja mentioned earlier. And we are concerned with this, and I will now tell you why. So it is expected that in the Green Claims Initiative, the Commission will recommend that the PEF method, the Product Environmental Footprint method, will be the method recommended to measure and express the environmental impact of products and to substantiate green claims. And together with other civil society organizations, we have voiced concern about this when it comes to agri-food products, because we think that the PEF method is not well suited to agri-food products. The first reason is that the PEF method does not allow to compare products across different food categories. So for instance, you would not be able to compare milk and a soy-based drink, for instance. But more fundamentally, the problem with PEF is that it's mostly an indicator of yields. And as such, it tends to favor the most intensive method of production. And this is because the PEF method lacks robust indicators for several key environmental impacts, such as, for instance, land degradation, biodiversity losses, or pesticide use. And at the same time, it also fails to capture the positive externalities of organic or extensive farming systems, such as, for instance, the positive impact on soil health, on biodiversity, etc. So we think that here we need to take a step back and in fact ask ourselves, okay, what signal do we want to send to consumers? Which products do we want to nudge them? And that should be, so to say, the guiding question to choose the most appropriate methods. And here we think that any environmental food label and the methodology behind it should aim at driving changes in diet and food production methods which are in line with the EU's objective for sustainable food and farming. And these are, for instance, reducing the use of pesticides, fertilizers, and antimicrobial in farming, but also increasing the share of organic food production, shifting to more plant-based diets. So these should be, let's say, the guiding principles for selecting the best methodology for an environmental food label. So from the consumer perspective, we have tried to develop some key principles that we think any meaningful environmental label for food should comply with. And first, when it comes to the development process, we think that such labels should be transparently developed based on solid scientific evidence, free for commercial interest. And this is really key for the label to be trusted and seen as credible by consumers. Second, when it comes to the format of the label, it should be interpretive. We have no experience from the nutrition area, and we know that labels that work best with consumers are the ones that come with an interpretive element, such as color coding, and they are especially effective with consumers from lower socioeconomic groups. Third, regarding the use of the label, as I said earlier, it should allow comparing products within a category to distinguish between different production systems and production methods, but it should also allow comparing products across food categories. And this is really important to drive consumers towards more plant-based diets. For instance, consumers should be able to compare, say, a beef steak and pulses. And that would not be possible with the PEF method, as I said earlier. And finally, it's also important that such label be accessible to all types of businesses, big and small. And that means that we need to strike the right balance between the robustness and level of accuracy of the assessment and the data that is being used for calculating the environmental impact. And then the need to keep the system as simple as possible so that it's really accessible to all types of businesses, including small producers. What's the point if all products go the same? So with this slide, I've tried to illustrate the need for the label to sufficiently discriminate between products, so between products across categories, but also within categories. And this is really important to steer consumers towards more sustainable production methods. These products are just examples from which you can find in Belgium, because in Belgium, some retailers have started using the Eco Score, so it's on their private label products. The Eco Score is a label that appeared on the French market, and it's based mostly on the PEF method, to which it adds some complementary indicators, for instance, such as the origin of the product, the packaging, etc. And while the intention is good initially, real-life examples, as you see on the slide, show that these corrections are not sufficient to discriminate between products. Concretely here, you see some eggs, some are barn eggs, others are free range, others are organic, but they all score the same. They all get a B, an Eco Score B. So it's really not useful information for consumers because it cannot really give them any information or guide them towards the most sustainable production method and products. And finally, just to conclude, I wanted to say a few words about the role of the food environment, because we've been talking a lot about labels, about consumer information, but in fact, we know this is not enough. We often hear that the market delivers what consumers want to buy, but things are more complicated than that. It's a bit like the chicken and egg dilemma. It is, in fact, a bit unfair to expect consumers to change their food behavior just based on information, when we know that at the same time, the unsustainable choice is the most available, the most advertised, and also often the cheapest option. So it's really important that we work beyond labeling and that we try to improve the food environment, meaning all the factors that shape people's choices, including pricing, marketing and advertising, but also promotion. So these are really key drivers that guide consumer choices, and unless we also act at this level, then just information will not be enough. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Hvala lepa. Zdaj pa smo že pri koncu današnjega dogodka, pa vendar bomo na hitro odgovorili še na nekaj vprašanj.
We are now nearing the end of today's event, but we will still answer a few questions. There was one from Ms. Kremić, and that is, what is the difference in organic farming between individual countries? Is there any difference between a product, or organic product that we buy in Slovenia or in the Netherlands? Well, yes, as I already said, all these products with a green organic label need to meet the same requirements. However, we know from our own experience that tomatoes, for example, in Slovenia, that are both grown in Slovenia and both have the same label, can be different. The next question is about the fair trade certificate. The question says that prices are still quite similar than those of conventional products. Where does the difference go? Where do profits go? I doubt that the farmers in third world countries get them. I hope I'm wrong. If you look at this issue, you can see that it's not only about the farmer, not only about the producer. Fair trade is about the entire distribution or production chain. So it's not about only the producer. If you pay more for a fair trade product, you help the entire community. So it's not only about the farmer that produced the product we bought, but these additional funds help support entire farming communities. Once you sum things up, this amounts to large steps. We are quite spoiled when it comes to food prices. Everything is quite cheap as it is, but fair trade products can be more expensive, but it's worth the extra cost. Sometimes it would be even more difficult to sell fair trade products to consumers if they were even more expensive. Well, there was another question saying that we saw that one of the reasons in the survey why we do not act sustainably, that this is too expensive. What about EU legislation on food? This is what can make a large difference. Can be something made in the field of subsidies. Why don't we subsidize organic products so that they're more comparable to conventional ones?
And this is a very good question and point. In fact, it's true that the subsidies that the common agricultural policy allocate to certain types of production, of course, has an influence on the price. And it's true that we still have too many subsidies that go, for instance, to livestock production, whereas we know that we should eat less meat. It's also even striking to see that the EU funds campaigns that encourage, in fact, the consumption of meats, when at the same time consumers hear that they should cut back on meat. And we've seen in the presentation today that for many consumers, it's in fact difficult to do so. So there is definitely a need to reallocate certain subsidies to make the sustainable choice more affordable to consumers. There is also a lot that national governments can do. For instance, we've seen now with the war in Ukraine that well, we see a rise in food prices, unfortunately. So it risks threatening access to food for even more consumers across Europe. But we've seen that in some countries, governments are discussing whether they could lower or abolish the VAT on certain products, such as fruit and vegetables, because these are also healthy products that we should consume more of. So there are measures that can be taken, but you need political will for this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Hvala lepa.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for 2 more questions. The next one is about organic meat farming. And it says, isn't organic meat even more, doesn't it have even more of an environmental footprint than meat grown on big farms? Yes, thank you for this question. Maybe I'd like to add something to what already Camille said. We need to reduce our meat consumption. Eating in a more climate-friendly way means that we need to stop eating meat every day. Apart from climate aspects, we also need to take into account social and animal welfare issues. So this would be a very short answer. Thank you. Now, as we are drawing to a close, the last question. If I, as a consumer that doesn't have time to read up on anything, what would be the 3 main tips or the 3 main labels that I need to choose when buying my products? Certainly, the first principle or the first label would be organic. You should buy organic products grown in Slovenia. That would be the EU organic label. Yes, I agree. When deciding for organic and fair trade products, you have already done a lot. There are certainly other labels that cover a wider range of environmental and health aspects. There certainly are some, but when talking about fair trade, it's better to use the main fair trade label, not the one with the arrow that only applies to certain ingredients in a product. Well, yes, this could be a good start. And we don't have any more time. The conference is at its end. I'd really like to thank all the speakers for all this detailed and relevant information. Now we've done a step towards understanding these labels better. The ecological crisis cannot be solved by changing eating habits alone, but we cannot adequately address the crisis without changing our eating habits. And yes, eating in a climate-friendly way has never been easier. Right now, every one of us has the power to be part of the solutions, of the solution for ourselves, our health, our communities, and our planet. So now we're really at the end. In the chat box, you can find a link to the evaluation study. I look forward to seeing you at our next events, and also your feedback is very welcome. As part of the Climate Menu project, we will have many more conferences in the autumn. Thank you.